I never thought I'd see the day when 2 sheriff's deputies would be standing on the porch of our secluded mountain cabin. Their boots groaned against the weathered pine boards as they delivered the unthinkable. We were being accused of criminal trespassing and breaking and entering. Officers, my wife Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. These people have been squatting here for weeks, she declared. The taller deputy, a man with graying temples and the kind of calm authority that comes from decades on the job, turned toward Sarah. Ma'am, we're going to need to see proof of ownership. As you'll see, this property was transferred to me 3 months ago when my Uncle Robert passed away. First confusion, then disbelief, then a hint of panic. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a stunned goldfish. Aye, there must be. 3 months earlier, Sarah and I had been sitting in a lawyer's office in downtown Denver, still trying to process the news. Her Uncle Robert, a lifelong forest ranger and the most self-reliant man I'd ever known, had passed away and left Sarah his most treasured possession. It had lake access, sweeping mountain views, and the kind of quiet that city folks spend their whole lives chasing. The property is free and clear, the attorney said, sliding a stack of papers across his polished mahogany desk. No liens, no mortgages, and according to county records, the land predates any homeowners association in the area. That weekend, we loaded up our truck with supplies and drove up into the mountains, hearts pounding with excitement. The cabin was everything we dreamed of, rustic yet well-maintained, with a grand stone fireplace dominating the living room and wide windows framing the Rockies like living artwork. We spent that first day exploring, marking spots for a vegetable garden, and talking about adding a deck extension. That's when we noticed the signs. Small metal placards nailed to trees and fence posts reading Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA Community Standards Enforced. Sarah frowned. Uncle Robert never said anything about an HOA. I shrugged it off. Probably just for the new houses down the hill. This place has been in your family since the 60s. How wrong I was. Our first encounter with Karen Pettin came exactly 1 week later. Sarah and I were hauling out old lumber from a collapsed shed when a white Lexus SUV purred up our gravel driveway, spotless despite the dirt roads. Out stepped a woman in her early 50s, her blonde hair lacquered into a helmet that could probably survive a hurricane. "Excuse me?" she called out, her tone brisk and commanding. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Karen Pettin, president of the Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA. I straightened and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Nice to meet you. I'm James Mitchell, and this is my wife Sarah. We just inherited this place from her uncle." Karen's sharp eyes flicked between us before she pulled out an iPad and started scrolling with manicured nails. Mitchell. I don't see any transfer paperwork filed with the HOA. You do know that all property transfers must be approved by the board, right? Sarah stepped forward with that determined look in her eyes. That always meant trouble for whoever stood in her way. "With all due respect, Mrs. Pettin, this cabin belonged to my Uncle Robert for over 40 years. It's private property," Karen laughed, a sound halfway between a scoff and a screech. "Oh honey, that's what they all say. Every property within 5 miles of Pine Ridge Lake falls under our jurisdiction, and I already see several violations. That lumber pile's an eyesore and needs to go. Your grass is over the height limit, and is that a bird feeder? Those attract rodents, strictly prohibited." She tapped furiously on her iPad. "I'll send you the new resident packet, but you'll need to attend next month's board meeting for occupancy approval. There's a $5,000 transfer fee, and your annual dues of $3,000 are already past due." Before we could even respond, she turned on her heel, climbed back into her Lexus, and sped off, leaving behind a trail of dust and disbelief. The next few weeks turned into a nightmare. Karen showed up constantly, clipboard in hand, documenting violations. Our firewood wasn't stacked to HOA specifications. The American flag on our porch was the wrong size. Even our old pickup truck was, in her words, bringing down property values. "This is harassment." Sarah fumed one evening after Karen spent 20 minutes lecturing us about an unapproved mailbox. Uncle Robert never dealt with any of this nonsense. That night, I decided to dig deeper. With my laptop open and a pot of coffee brewing, I started tracing the HOA's history, and what I found was shocking. The Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA had only been formed 8 years ago to manage a cluster of luxury homes on the south shore of the lake. Our cabin, however, sat on the north shore on land that had existed since the 1950s, zoned rural residential and never included in any planned community. "Look at this," I told Sarah, showing her the county zoning maps. "Our property isn't part of their HOA at all." Her eyes brightened. "So, she has no authority over us." "None whatsoever." The next time Karen came around, we were ready. She marched up the driveway with a stack of papers and a face full of righteous fury. "I've been more than patient," she announced. "Here are your citations, $3,000 in fines for multiple violations. You're scheduled for a disciplinary hearing next Tuesday." I didn't take the papers. "Mrs. Peyton, we've looked into this. Our property isn't under your HOA's jurisdiction." Her face went beet red. "That's where you're wrong. I've been president for 6 years. I know exactly where our boundaries are. Your uncle might have gotten away with ignoring the rules, but you won't. Sarah crossed her arms. Then show us the official HOA maps that include our property. Karen's lips tightened. Those are confidential documents. Only board members can view them. Then we'll request them from the county, I said calmly. In the meantime, please stop coming here uninvited. You're trespassing. Karen gave a bitter little laugh. Trespassing? I'm conducting official HOA business. But fine, have it your way. Don't come crying to me when the sheriff gets involved. She stomped back to her SUV, snapping photos of our property as she left, and I had a sinking feeling she meant every word. 3 weeks later, things came to a head. I had to drive back to Denver for a meeting, leaving Sarah at the cabin to finish painting the kitchen cabinets. Around 2 p.m., my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, but instead of her voice, I heard the crackle of police radios. James, she said, her voice steady but tight, you need to come back. Karen called the cops and told them I broke into the cabin. My knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as I merged onto the highway, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and fury. This was war. Are you okay? What happened? I asked the moment I picked up the phone. I'm fine, Sarah replied, though I could hear the tremor in her voice. The deputies are here now. I showed them the deed, but James, she told them I was a dangerous squatter. They had their hands on their weapons when they approached me. The drive back to the cabin felt like the longest 90 minutes of my life. My pulse hammered with every mile until finally I turned up our gravel road. 2 sheriff's cruisers sat in the driveway, lights still flashing, and right beside them, Karen's white Lexus gleamed like a snake in the sun. Sarah was on the porch, papers clutched in her hand as she spoke with the deputies. Karen stood off to the side, arms crossed and foot tapping with impatient arrogance. Officer, I said as I stepped out of my truck, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rage boiling in my chest. I'm James Mitchell, Sarah's husband. Can someone please tell me what's going on here? The lead deputy, a tall man with graying hair and exhaustion etched into his face, introduced himself as Deputy Harrison. Mr. Mitchell, he began. Mrs. Pettin here called 911, reporting that your wife had broken into this cabin. She claimed to have documentation proving the property is under her HOA's control and that you were trespassing. I turned toward Karen, whose chin tilted upward in defiance. Deputy Harrison continued, his tone firm. However, your wife has provided clear proof of ownership. The deed lists her as the sole owner, properly filed with the county 3 months ago. This is ridiculous. Karen exploded, her voice shrill. They haven't paid HOA fees, haven't attended meetings. They're in total violation of ma'am. The deputy interrupted sharply, his patience clearly evaporating. Whether or not they're part of your HOA is a civil matter, but making a false 911 call, claiming a crime in progress, is a criminal offense. That's a misuse of emergency services. Karen's face drained of color. I genuinely believed the HOA records show. Show what exactly? Sarah cut in, her tone cold and razor sharp. That you've been harassing homeowners who aren't even part of your association. That you've been trespassing on our property for weeks. Let's all take a breath, Deputy Harrison said, raising a hand. Mrs. Pettin, I strongly suggest you verify your HOA boundaries before making any more complaints. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, if this continues, you can file a harassment report with our office. As the deputies wrapped up and prepared to leave, Harrison pulled me aside. His voice dropped low. Between you and me, he said quietly, this isn't the first time we've had problems with Mrs. Pettin and her hope. You might want to talk to your neighbors. That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The adrenaline from the day finally wore off, leaving behind a mix of exhaustion and quiet fury. We can't let this go, Sarah said firmly. She could have gotten me shot. What if I hadn't had the deed on me? I nodded. First thing tomorrow, we're setting up security cameras, and we need a lawyer, Sarah added. Someone who knows property law and HOA disputes. Over the next week, we turned our fear into determination. 8 high-resolution cameras went up, covering every inch of our land. Then we started knocking on doors. That's when the stories started pouring out. Tom and Ellen Brewster, who lived half a mile down the road, told us she fined us $3,000 for having the wrong color shutters. We've been here since 1995, long before her HOA even existed. Then there was Mike Garza, a third-generation cabin owner near the lake. He showed us a pile of bogus citations. She keeps claiming my land's part of the HOA, but county records say otherwise. She just won't stop. The biggest breakthrough came from Dorothy Chen, an 80-year-old widow who had once worked in the county planning department. She invited us in for tea, then spread a collection of old maps across her kitchen table. I remember when that HOA was formed, she said, adjusting her glasses. Its boundaries only ever covered the new development on the South Shore. Everything else was grandfathered in as rural residential. Then she leaned in conspiratorially. But I've heard rumors that the maps the HOA keeps on file are the same ones the county approved. Might be worth looking into. Armed with that information, we met with our new attorney, Patricia Hawkins, a sharp-minded woman in her 40s who specialized in property and HOA law. She listened to our story carefully, occasionally scribbling notes with deliberate precision. False 911 calls, trespassing, harassment, possibly fraudulent records, she summarized. If what you're describing checks out, Mrs. Pettin could be facing both civil and criminal charges. What do we do first? I asked. Patricia's smile was confident and razor-ridged. We start with a formal complaint to the county, focusing on the boundary discrepancies. Then we request every official document related to your property, both from the HOA and the county. If fraud exists, we'll uncover it. 2 weeks later, Patricia called with barely contained excitement. You're not going to believe this.